Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Parallel Barking.
Woof woof.
Yeah, there he is. And I'm Ariana. If you couldn't tell who that was
Woof
Daddy
woof.
Backer, Larry, for
Woof woof.
all you other non-progeny of him. We are today starting a series I'm very excited about. A series having to do with something that we all should be very concerned with, our security. Security of all different types. Today, we are
Right.
going
And what we're going to discover is that the word is actually meaningless,
right.
Except in the specific context in which you use it.
All right, semiotics king, but all words, if we go into this conversation, we could talk in a loop, honestly.
Which is why you should always be suspicious of people bearing word gifts.
Oh, that's true. Today, we'll be focusing on what we're calling food security.
And thank God I ate, otherwise I'd be completely insecure about this conversation.
I have not, so I will be starving throughout, which might make me hangry toward the end. So,
although it will put you in the appropriate state, reflecting what may be going on globally. But anyway,
so what brought this conversation on was everybody should know what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. It's a little disconcerting. There's disruption, obviously, in the supply chain. But Daddy was listening to
woof woof.
the Farm Report of all things the other day, and it was saying some interesting things. What was it saying, Dad?
All right. Well, a couple of things, and they're worth talking about, and I'm actually very curious about your reaction. One of them was a reminder that conditions of war are not very conducive to ordinary things like planting. And while planting in northern Siberia may be something of a hobby, planting in what for a while had been the breadbasket of Europe and a good chunk of the rest of the world might have repercussions. Ukraine, of course, is a big farm state and a farm exporter. I think, if I remember correctly, the Ukraine and Russia, there are about any number of countries, somewhere between 20 and 30 countries that rely especially on wheat imports. But
I can give you some of the numbers.
Right. But of course,
Ukraine,
it's not just wheat. It's all kinds of grain.
Wheat, corn, sunflower oil. And It's not just Europe that rely on these exports and imports. It's a good majority of Asia
and sub-Saharan Africa, which is always in danger of food scarcity.
Yeah, so that's a great point. These are places that are already suffering from food shortages in a lot of instances.
Right, but I don't want to sound either like CNN or Fox or and by doing that, I'm trying to be fair and balanced by suggesting that all news services may advertently or inadvertently describe this reporting in ways that are consonant with their own normative narratives of the way things ought to be going. But putting all of that aside, the ramifications are actually far more significant than merely the linear, there's no planting in Ukraine, and therefore all kinds of things will happen. The consequences are much more complicated and perhaps more interesting and somewhat more generalized. So I'll give you an example. A couple of days ago, Indonesia, for fear of what they view as the impending scarcity and disruptions in supply chain, effectively banned the export of palm oil. Indonesia is one of the larger exporters of palm oil. And for those of you who are not familiar with your kitchens, but you're familiar with manufactured food for which you rely, palm oil is an important, cheap ingredient in the manufacture of food. It's caused a tremendous amount of issues in the business and human rights community, in the sustainability and climate change communities, in the communities about labor and labor justice. And I'm putting those aside for a second, but those remain very real. The problem here is the cascading effect. We've got multiple cascading effects here. This is one, wheat and grains coming out of Ukraine and to a little bit of an extent Russia. And then another one appearing to come out of left field, which is the hopefully temporary halting of exports of a critical substance, palm oil. Now, everyone will scoff, and here's where the complexity comes, because they say, ah, ha, ha, you simple-minded fool. So what if the Ukraine can't be planting their wheat? They'll have a hard time food-wise, but that's the way war goes. Ha ha. So what if palm oil is banned from export in Indonesia? There's a large tropical area and we can get our palm oil somewhere else. But that's precisely the problem. So, for example, and it gets very convoluted.
Yeah, it's because of the supply chains that we've established.
No, it's the demand chains, not the supply chain. You're talking
they're hand in
I'm
hand.
talking about,
they're hand in hand
well,
because
let me hold the other hand first.
okay. I mean, we can go into this because I'll.
All right, because what it's going to affect, it's not going to, the picture that we painted, and quite rightly, is starving people in Mali, let's say, and the sub-Saharan and sub-Saharan Africa or Saharan Africa. But where it's also going to affect is the pocketbook of Joe and Mary Suburban, who live in within 20 clicks of the center of St. Louis, or Bill and Bob, nice people who live in Lexington outside of Boston. Because what winds up happening is at some point, someone's going to step up. And generally what that means, especially now at the beginning of planting season, is that a lot of farmers will start planting and price of grains elsewhere will go up and may be moved for export. This happened to some extent with beef in the American market. It became more lucrative to sell your beef in Asia than it was to sell it here. There's a scarcity of beef because of prior decisions, and all of a sudden the price of beef skyrockets. Ukraine can't produce grains, and a lot of people need it, and that means two things. One, the price of grain is going to go, well, scarcity first, and then what that means is that the price of grain is going to go up, and grain that would otherwise go to feed more developed and privileged countries at a cheaper price is now going to become far more expensive because there'll be less of it. Not that the Americans are going to starve, but there'll be less of it as it gets diverted. And so that then produces a cascading effect that pushes out of food and into inflation.
Well, and it has a direct link to our globalized supply chains.
Right. We're going to get to your supply chain in a second, but it also then produces a different face to food insecurity. And you move from the lack of availability of products to the cost of products that may be beyond the reach of a segment of the population.
And that's where we're talking about
supply chain,
inflation, and that's where we're talking about the IMF and the World Bank concluding their
spring meeting. Why are you bringing those people up?
No, because it's really important. I mean, this also has a lot to do with China and the recent.
I was wondering when you were going to bring that up. Not everything is China's fault, you know. Okay,
well, it is having, the cascading domino effect. It's contributing to soaring food prices and supply demand from the China shutdown and the war in Ukraine.
What China shutdown?
After the COVID-19,
Yeah.
China called for a lockdown of an estimated 400 million.
Oh, you're talking about the Shanghai, the lockdown in the large cities.
Yes.
Most recently in Shanghai. All
And
right.
not only that, there have been rumblings that the food from those imports on the ports have been taking a really long time to make their way to the people in China.
Well, there's been a
During
lot of
food
rumors.
shortage
Right. There's been a
conversation.
lot of rumors in about food scarcity in a lockdown context in China. I think it's way too early to be able to figure out what is truth and what is not. But
Well, right,
I take your point.
right,
which is
but it
that-
is spurring supply chain conversations. People thinking that our supply chains are not
right.
secure, they're not resilient enough. So people, specifically Janet Yellen, our US Treasury Secretary, thinking that we need to re-examine.
Really?
And
I hope she
address.
goes and puts on a pair of coveralls and goes and start digging in the dirt, because it's very easy to say that, having led a privileged life from the halls of the Federal Reserve to the
It does seem
halls of the
way too
Treasury,
easy to
you
say
know,
that.
and and please forgive me, but one becomes fairly tired of listening to bubble people who've been living more or less privileged life pontificate about things that will never touch them because they're so insulated from this. But now I've said my piece, and now we can go back to dealing with our glorious leaders and leadership all over the world. And I'm not making a reference to liberal democracy, I'm making a general reference to virtually every institutional player who's now getting caught up in the cascading problems of, as you describe it, on the operational side, supply chain issues, that is delivery issues.
Mhm.
And as I'm talking about it on my side, which is production and distribution production and decision, market-based decision points on distribution, but it becomes very real. So what looks like the kernel of this thing, which is the Ukrainian farmers aren't planting, now becomes part of and mixed in with a tremendous number of other issues. And we haven't touched about on some of the bigger ones, which does affect China, but more specifically Japan.
Yes. Oh no, don't you take that from me. Don't you take that from me.
Wait, what am I taking? You don't even know where I'm going.
Oh, are you going to talk about the depreciation of the Japanese yen?
No, I don't care about the yen. I'm talking about food, not money. I can't eat
Well,
money,
it has to
as far
do
as I
with the
know.
food prices.
I'm not talking about food prices. I'm talking about Japanese, large scale Japanese, and not just the Japanese, the French. Everyone is doing this now, large countries with enhanced appetites for food as their consumptions go up.
Well, yeah.
They've been going to developing states, the French, for example, in Kenya and Tanzania, and changing the patterns of local farmers producing food for local populations. In the French case or the EU case, I don't mean to blame the French, it's an EU problem. The EU people have a real love for string beans, right? They love their string beans. You know,
So random.
in East Africa, string beans, as I remember, in some cultures anyway, are great for feeding animals, but you know, certainly not for other people. And you grow other things. Well, large food agro multinationals will come in and will start. You don't have to invade a country to control its territory anymore. You just enter into large-scale deals with farmers and farmer cooperatives, and you make use of the land. You don't have the bother of having to put troops in. You don't have to administer. You don't have to
Ooh,
take
I
care of
know who
people.
you're alluding to.
Yeah, you do. And so you wind up doing this. The Japanese have done this, and it's not just from rich countries to poor countries. Some of the finest Kobe beef is grown in Montana, as I understand it. And in your home state, some of the finest, for example, Japanese pears that are used for holidays are grown in the northwest coast of Washington. And that brings the next level of food security and food security issues, which is, well, if you run out of space in your own country to grow, can you go into other countries and then use their territory as a basis effectively for expanding your own agricultural acreage to satisfy your local populations, right? So you mix that now with the Ukrainian problem, you mix that with defensive measures, especially in markets that are crazy with respect to palm oil, right?
And then you see all this increased risk.
Well, and you also, now we can get to your yen issue.
Yes. Yeah.
Because we see inflation and we see the way in which it will, to some extent, disrupt potentially, I guess, and you can tell us what you were thinking of in terms of the finance issues.
Well, okay, so the Bank of Japan is keeping interest rates low. And I think part of it is that it's set to hit its long held 2% target around the next 60 days.
What, for economic growth?
The inflation target of 2%.
Oh, the inflation target is 2%. Oh God,
Yeah.
good for them.
Yeah. Keeping interest rates low can be good, but then it can also devalue your currency, which it currently, the yen is at its weakest level it has been in the last 2 decades.
Right, it hurts imports.
Yeah.
Unless of course, what you have is intra-corporate transfers from an agricultural subsidiary in Tanzania to the home office in Kyoto.
Oh, that means, yeah.
So there are ways and there are ways, but yeah,
the theory, the theory is that because the current inflation is being driven by outside factors that are just a one-time thing, they're out of the Bank of Japan's control. They're causing the prices to soar, but the demand will drop because the prices are so high, and that will give time for the economy to cool. And
so they're taking, and it's not an unreasonable risk.
Right.
The Americans are taking a very different route, although it's not clear whether anyone is really at the helm here. They're waiting for their focus groups to tell them what it is that they ought to think, and then how it is that they ought to package it for our consumption. That's another that's an intellectual food scarcity issue that's now being driven by the American proclivity to have these kind of weird self-reflexive conversations with their focus group out of their ivory towers. But that's a different podcast. And we're all starving there. Although on the other hand, that would be, what's it called, empty calories, where we think we're being fed and actually we're not consuming anything of any nutritional value. But let's get back to food and food scarcity. So in what the big fear for a lot of folks is that the bank, and I'll start with your actually quite astute insight about the Bank of Japan, is the notion that, look, we can detach this. This is an extraordinary event, and we don't have to worry about any of this stuff because eventually either Ukraine will survive or Ukraine won't, and certainly it won't be because of the Americans. It'll be because of the Ukrainians and a private enterprise, which are the only people who seem to be effectively helping them.
Right.
Although who knows surreptitiously what is going on behind the scenes. So you can't be overly critical of anyone at this point because we don't have all the information. They're putting that aside. They believe it's a one-off thing. And as soon as Ukraine's done, we can go all back to happy land. The problem is, I think, that there is no happy land to go back to, that once this is exposed, a lot of countries are going to be thinking about food security the way they thought about pandemic.
Yeah. Oh, we can't rely on this anymore. Right. We have
COVID was a one-off thing. And then if you really think about it, you go, well, what about the next COVID? And do we need to prepare? So we've got this major problem here, and you won't see it until next year. I mean, this is a slow motion train wreck that's coming up. Should we be prepared for the next food disaster? And at that point, states may begin, and you hear a little whiff of this in Africa, but states may begin to become more conservative in the way in which they deal with, or they expose the totality of their farmlands to the vagaries of international markets, and certainly to the vagaries of trusting other countries, right? In a context of globalized, what's it called, functional differentiation.
I mean, how long has the US been going out to other countries using the agricultural landscape to?
Stop beating up on the US. It's,
No,
it's like,
I mean, okay, so the US and China and Japan, how long has that been going on?
that's mutual. The
I
American,
know it's mutual, but like,
I mean, remember that you've got the Japanese coming into the US, even as
I'm
the
not
US
saying
goes
it's
and
a
farms.
bad thing. I'm asking how long has it been going on?
In the current form, probably close to a generation, but there were, you can trace this back a long way, and it comes in a variety of different manifestations. In its horrible, racialized, xenophobic aspects of a century or a century and a half ago, we had the rise of the banana republics in Latin America as the American multinationals would go in. So, and then before that, you've got a different aspect of this. So this isn't like this brand new thing that is the product of evil post-capitalist neoliberal excess, or however the left likes to talk about it.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to point out this isn't new. This is
no, it's, well, the problem generally isn't new. The way in which it manifests today is different. And therefore, the way you identify it, the way you figure out what the risk is, and the way you respond to it without destroying the system is going to be very different than what you would have thought of, let's say, in 1930 or 1900, right, or 1850. Or 1750, right? There's no East India Company anymore, although I love those TV series. They're very pretty costumes. We're not dealing with, but there is one other thing that we have to remember. History has a really morbidly really morbidly ironic streak.
Yeah.
There was a time not all that long ago, actually a century ago, just about, when the Ukraine was also the target of the Russians, in this case, the Soviet Central Authorities, who, in the face of famine in the Russian Soviet, engineered what became a horrible famine in the Ukraine that caused, as I understand it, several millions of people to die of starvation, as whatever grains were being produced in the Ukraine were sent somewhere else, and there was no food anywhere there. So it's kind of ironic that about 100 years on, it's the Russians again, the Russian Federation this time instead of the Russian Soviet. It's the Russians again who, by their machinations and actions, are again going to be the authors of what is likely to be famine in the Ukraine and food instability everywhere else. There is, and of course, because no one has any kind of historical sense unless they use it vacuously to advance some kind of bizarrely stupid political agenda. No one really has the kind of sense of history that that would allow them to view this as what appears to be a recurring pattern in this part of the world.
Or sadder still, we saw it coming and did nothing.
Well, of course. Well, that's another podcast. The war in Ukraine is a reality TV show that will be televised for the consumption of elites who don't want to get their hands dirty everywhere.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm actually
Brussels and Washington.
Inside. Yeah, I mean, honestly,
the revolution will be televised.
I kept on watching the beginnings of this thinking, all right, this is probably just going to be like a World War II situation where It's
Well,
just
no,
going to take a minute for
yes.
the US
Well,
to jump
what's
in.
even more pathetic is that 3 years from now, we're going to have an enormous number of entertainment products on the History Channel, which for the
Yes.
moment is a World War II channel, which constantly spins World War II stories. And now what we're doing is creating reels and reels and reels. I don't know if we do reels on anymore because of the technology has changed, but thinking of this from an ancient perspective, hundreds of miles of film that we can then edit for the consumption of a product-starved media audience worldwide.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. That's not food insecurity, but it is an aside.
Food for thought.
It's food for thought. But the issue of food security is a very general issue. And even without the problem in Ukraine, it has become an issue that many countries, especially developing countries, have to worry about quite seriously. For developed states, including China, the problem is one of inconvenience in the sense, with the caveat of your supply chain issue, which can be real and not just inconvenient, but it can be quite irritating and political dynamite. But for privileged countries, it's a matter of pricing, and ultimately we can afford it or substitutes for food that we can't get. For developing states, they don't have that kind of luxury. And if you're talking about a country that's surviving on rice and beans, and you make it impossible by disrupting the ability to have rice, beans, and oil, i.e. palm oil, in basic subsistence or very developing jurisdictions. So we're not talking about Chateaubriand, we're talking about a supply of oil, rice, and beans.
Yeah.
Then you've got a real problem. And I would suggest for many developing states, now would be the time to think very hard about everything from policies, very generous policies of leasing land for food export, and their product mix when you have to deal with a population that you're going to have to feed, because a population that is starving is not a population on which you can build stable democratic regimes.
Yes. Oh man, that makes me think of the French Revolution.
No, you don't even have to go that far back, but that's right. Hungry people go back to Syria in 2011.
Oh, right.
2012.
Oh yeah, that was most recent.
Yeah, I mean, hungry people are not going to be pacified by commercials on television. So anyway.
Final thought, Dad.
Oh, I've given more than enough. Final
okay,
thought.
My final thought is more simple. I know that on last Wednesday, the UN Food and Agricultural Organization had declared the need for a fund for up to $25 billion to help nations in need deal with the higher prices from the war. I'm not sure exactly what that fund is. I probably should have looked that up before I mentioned anything, but if you all are interested, I suggest that you Google it and do your part.
All right, well, that will be, now you've energized me again. That is the subject of another podcast, and that will be,
Aid.
Is food security a function of charity from public international organizations, or is it one that actually empowers states that are currently food insecure, empowers them to take more proactive control of their own food production? But
It should be that. It should be the second one, but you know that when bleeding hearts see.
And by the way, that wasn't a political statement. Bleeding hearts can bleed red or blue.
Absolutely. See people suffering, they're going to step in no matter what. So it doesn't.
Of course, and they ought to, and charity is important. So it's not to put charity down, but at the same time, the way you aid people, when one thinks about aid, one ought to think about its quality as well as its immediacy. Clearly, if someone is starving now, you're going to have to provide immediate aid in some form, and you can't wait.
You have to think
But
about
in
the
long term,
longevity.
and and none of this is new. We're not inventing any of
You're
this.
right. Yep.
But at the same time that we're still talking about this is ought to make one scratch one's head,
Hmm.
assuming that supply chain disruptions did not make finding shampoo difficult.
Hilarious.
Hilarious. All right, woof woof.
Bark, bark. Everyone, see you next time. Thanks for joining.